Salvete omnes, this is I'm Amelia, also known as the Martian Geek, and welcome to, presumably, the final Bayonetta Scale episode. This one is basically for stuff that didn't fit anywhere else, mainly additions and changes to previous information, so let's get right to it. First off, let's discuss the ratings that I ended up changing from what I said initially. One of those cases is the Game Boy Mega Man games. I'm increasing their rating from 4 to 5. I'm still not as familiar with them as I am the main ones, but I did play a bit of some of them, and well, it turns out that playing Mega Man with the same hitbox sizes but only about 2/3 as much room to dodge and react to stuff is actually pretty frustrating. Some of the individual design elements really didn't help either. That escape sequence in the Game Boy version of Mega Man 4 with all the missiles that you have to shoot out of the way is one of the worst designed things I've ever seen in a Mega Man game, and I've played a lot of them. And unlike with their home console counterparts, I haven't played any of them on a real system, and at this point I might never get to, because the original cartridges are expensive, especially 4 and 5. Most of the Mega Man games that I own I got for a reasonable price, with the major outliers being Mega Man 7 and X3, both of which were around $80 when I bought them. Mega Man 1 through 6 were all $60 or under, as were X1 and X2. 8 and the rest of the X games were cheap. I got a repro cart for Mega Man and Base, as well as the Game Boy Advance version, and 9, 10, and 11 were fine because they're modern games that were released digitally, exclusively so except for 11, so they couldn't be scalped. The Game Boy games, though, I don't recall 1 through 3 being too bad last I checked, but at this time 4 will run you $150 or so, and you can be the proud owner of an original Mega Man 5 Game Boy cartridge for about $400. There's no collection for them either as far as I'm aware. I think at least some of them are on one of the virtual consoles, but since the Game Boy only has 2 face buttons, they'll probably be unreasonably hard to play, because Nintendo insists on mapping A and B on a retro system to A and B on the modern one rather than the much more sensible B and Y. So emulation is clearly the best option for you and me. I just need to pretend that save states don't exist while I'm practicing them. Still though, most of them aren't as good as their Arabic numeral counterparts to begin with, and I still have a few of those left. While we're on that subject, I'm bumping Mega Man and Base up from 2 to 4. The thing about this game is that I've only beaten it without save states twice, on 2 different systems and with 2 different characters, and in both cases it was very frustrating. Most of the problems come down to the fortress. The Robot Master stages are hard, but not ridiculously harder than most of the ones in the other games. Even the first fortress stage is challenging, but doable. The third one is pretty tough, but it's not the worst that it could be for a final level, especially if you can get used to the Dr. Wily fight. But the second stage is an absolute nightmare. It contains several bosses, some of which are decently difficult in their own right, and it is very long as a result. And if you lose all your lives at the end, you do the entire thing over again. It really should have been 2 or even 3 separate stages, and the stupid plane thing should have been more lenient. That stage alone discourages me from even wanting to play the game all the way through again, way more so than Quickman, Wily Machine 7, or Gates Laboratory. And honestly, while the game does do some interesting things with the different playstyles, the shop, being one of the more advanced games in the classic series and all, you could get most of that with Mega Man 7 through 11 and not get as frustrated. If you have to skip one game in the series, this is probably the best choice. It doesn't have a number anyway. I'll probably still get around to it eventually, but I'm in no hurry. Mega Man Battle Network is also getting a downgrade from 7 to 8. I think I actually underestimated the gap between my skill and the game's difficulty before. I swear it feels just as challenging as regular Mega Man when it comes to dodging, except there are random encounters and you die in 3 or 4 hits instead of 6 or 7. I didn't grow up playing these. Well, okay, technically I didn't really grow up with the classic series either. I don't think I got into those until I was 18 or so. But I kind of feel like I'd just rather play a regular Mega Man game or a regular RPG. From what I've seen, they involve a heck of a lot of padding and backtracking too. They have some interesting ideas, especially the battle system, but I don't really have enough of a reason to let's play these over something like the Mario and Luigi games, which do the RPG with action elements thing in a way that I'm much more used to. I'm also bringing Rokko-Chan up from 6 to 7. The issue with this game is outside of the fourth wall. Flash stopped being supported after December 2020, but fortunately somebody did make a standalone version of this. Unfortunately, they still didn't make the controls customizable, so it's basically unplayable without a controller, and my adapter hadn't been working quite right with this game. And of course I can't do what I did for Yooka-Laylee because it's not a Steam game. If anyone knows of a way to get a PS4 controller to work on PC games that aren't on Steam, that could be helpful. Then there's the last 8-bit or 8-bit styled game on our list, Shovel Knight. I'm dropping its rating from 6 to 3. The popularity thing really shouldn't be as big a deal as I thought. For one thing, the game doesn't actually seem to be as popular as I'd thought, and I haven't heard much about it in a while. This is about the only game that actually went down on the scale. Daffy Duck the Marvin missions is going from 5 up to 6. It's not a big jump, but honestly this game is kind of confusing to navigate. I end up doing a lot of bumbling around hoping that I find treasure and then the exit without dying. Basically, there are other licensed games that I think would be easier to do. Touhou is also going from 5 to 6. It shouldn't have been a 5 in the first place. There are still only 2 games in the series that I've gotten to the end on, and one that I've come close on, and they'd probably be higher if they weren't so short. And even if I did manage to beat one during a Let's Play, there's that whole not showing the ending thing. Then again, maybe I don't actually care about that. If Zune really insists on gatekeeping the endings like that in a game that hard and unforgiving, maybe his wishes don't deserve to be respected. 1cc's, naturally, are and will always be a 10. Metroid gets a downgrade from 6 to 7. I replayed Super Metroid somewhat recently, and even though I continue to get better at remembering where things are, it's still pretty much confirmed my thought that it might not be a good LP for me personally. Unless I plan out a specific route beforehand, there would be a lot of just wandering around doing nothing of note that wouldn't be very exciting to watch. Trails of Cold Steel I'm bumping up from 6 to 7. These games are as long as or longer than Trails in the Sky, and they seem to have a lot more dialogue and cutscenes, as well as a lot more annoying bosses. I think the same is true for the Crossbell games, actually. And Trails in the Sky already took quite a lot of time. The games are fun to play on my own time, but I don't really want to put in the work to Let's Play them unless people really want to watch them. And considering that the comments section for my Trails in the Sky Let's Play was absolute crickets and tumbleweeds, I don't get the impression that people care that much about watching them. The Lost Levels is going from 3 to 5. While I still think it will happen eventually, assuming I'm still doing LPs, it's not a very good game. Admittedly, I do think it has more interesting level design than the original Super Mario Bros., even if it's often interesting for the wrong reasons. But if there's one 2D Mario game that you can skip without missing much, it's this one. Well, okay, New Super Luigi U is even more skippable, but I'm not sure I'd count that as a full game. It's more like glorified DLC. Yoshi's Woolly World is getting a split score. Previously, I'd given it a 6. Now, I'd say that it gets a 5 if I'm just playing through all the main levels and not worrying about completion, while a playthrough that does go for completion is a 7. While I still don't like it as well as the original Yoshi's Island, it's a pretty decent game overall, but getting all the collectibles is a huge headache. Say what you want about some of the more obscure secrets in Yoshi's Island, but I don't recall that game ever hiding things in completely unmarked invisible clouds and random patches of empty air. Also, as irritating as most of the extra levels in Yoshi's Island are, they're much worse in Woolly World, not least because none of them have any checkpoints. In the original Yoshi's Island, the first 3 extras were pretty short, the 4th one was a maze with very low actual danger, and the last 2 did have a few middle rings each. In this game, they made the same mistake that Retro Studios and others did and had you restart the whole freaking level from the beginning every time you die, because apparently they think pointless repetition is fun. The game also suffers from having some recycled boss characters, but that's a minor thing. It's definitely a game worth playing, but during my playthrough, after a while, I just decided not to worry about any missed collectibles for my own sanity. Magic the Gathering Arena is going up to a 9. This is a weird one. It could potentially make decent material for a stream, but it was never really a great option for a Let's Play anyway. The thing is, though, 2022 was rough on my engagement with Magic. I didn't have as much money to buy cards due to saving up for a trip, and I had limited ability to get together with friends to play it. The worst part, though, was what was going on in the lore. I'll spare you the gory details, mainly because I have enough to rant about that, as with Undertale, it would be best done as a separate video, but put it this way, bringing back my least favorite villain faction in any media ever is bad, but brainwashing some of my favorite characters to serve said villains is 100 times worse. The last time I remember being this disgusted with the Ticktoffida story was when I read Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix back in 2004 or so. I seriously considered selling off my collection on a couple occasions. There's still room for things to turn around and people's souls to get mended, but boy, the payoff for this better be freaking amazing with how much of a gut punch the setup has been. As far as how March of the Machine and the Aftermath resolved the situation goes, it could have been a lot worse, but it could definitely have been a lot better too. And there are some aspects of it that were just insulting. So, no, I'm still not optimistic. Besides, I'm not very good at trimming my decks down to a reasonable size, nor am I good at dealing with the toxic aspects of the fandom. And believe me, there are toxic aspects of the Magic fandom. Some people are okay, but some of them would definitely give me a few poison counters if they damaged me. So I might attract the wrong sorts of people, or just end up being too salty. The increased focus on premium products that are just blatant cash grabs, hello 30th anniversary set, doesn't help my attitude any either. Finally, I think doing text commentary is less likely than I'd originally thought. Previously, I'd had it as 2 for using it all, and 4 for a full Let's Play. Now I'd say it's more like 4 to use it all, and 6 for a full game. The Wrath of Cortex time trials really made it sink in how much of a nuisance those are to edit, at least in the way that I'd been doing them, and I haven't really even tried using them in the new video editor yet. While I do think I'm noticeably more eloquent in writing compared to speech, it just seems like the extra time and effort wouldn't be worth it for a format that most people probably like less anyway. Next, I'd like to give retroactive ratings to the games that I played before I came up with the system, just for fun. I'll try to get through these quickly, there's not much to elaborate on with them. Mega Man 2, I think, would have been a 1. It probably would have been higher if I'd started these when I wasn't familiar with Mega Man or wasn't very good at them, but now it's right up there with Mario and Donkey Kong for inevitability, and Mega Man 2 is a good place to start. Super Mario World is about as much of a 1 as they come. It's one of the most classic games of all time, fun, not too hard, and easy to record. The only real problem is that it's too popular, and that wasn't something I worried about back in 2010. SMW Hacks 101, I would guess, would be a 4. I'd had bad experiences with Super Mario World hacks even back then, so I didn't know if I'd ever play any on my channel, but this was one of the easier ones, so it might be a good start. Donkey Kong Country 3, another definite 1. Donkey Kong Country is probably my favorite game series of all time, so why wouldn't I play it here? Mega Man X6 would have been a 2, I think. I would definitely do Mega Man X on there if I did any Mega Man games, though I might not expect to start with X6. Yoshi's Island is another easy 1. In addition to being another classic that's still one of my favorite games of all time, it's on the Super Nintendo, so again it's pretty easy to record. Unless for some reason your emulator has trouble with Super FX games. Mega Man 8 would get a 1, much like the other Mega Man games. Super Mario RPG would likely have gotten a 3. At that point, I'd barely tried playing RPGs at all, let alone commenting on them. It's not especially long or difficult as RPGs go, though, and it aged way better than literally every other RPG from that era that I know of, so there is that. The Magical Quest probably would have been a 3. While I don't think it would have been a guarantee, it still would have been pretty likely. Mega Man X2, predictably, would have been a 1. Donkey Kong Country 2 would have been a 1. If I played one Donkey Kong Country game, I would have played all 3 of the original trilogy. Crash Bandicoot 2 would have been a 3, I think. It would have depended on how familiar I was with the series at that point, how used to 3D games I was in general, and whether or not I wanted to do the first game first. Mega Man 7 would have been a 1. Super Mario Land 2 would have been a 5. Unlike the home console Mario games, the handheld ones were not something I played growing up. It took until I started using emulators, and possibly until I got my first Game Boy Advance from a pawn shop, for me to gain any familiarity with these. Toy Story would have been a 5. This was actually one of the first video games I ever owned, one of the 9 that came with our Super Nintendo when my dad traded a homemade knife to my cousin for it. I'm not sure he even has the knife anymore, whereas I still play that console over 25 years later, so I think we got the better end of that deal. The other 8 were Super Mario World, Super Mario All-Stars, Super Mario Kart, Donkey Kong Country, Yoshi's Island, Brawl Brothers, and Bart's Nightmare. I beat at least 1 or 2 of those when I was fairly young, but this game was and is far from easy. I had to have my dad play through several of the levels as a kid, but even now a couple of them still give me trouble, like Roller Bob and the Claw Machine boss. Thank goodness that you can use save states to bypass the obnoxious lack of a save system, because otherwise this would be kinda rough. Mario & Luigi's Starlight Island Adventure would have been a 4, basically for the same reasons as SMW Hacks 101. I forget if I'd played any of Gamma V's hacks before this, though. Mega Man X4 would have been a 2, naturally. Donkey Kong Country, of course, would have been a 1. The Minish Cap, that would probably have been a 7. I doubt I would have played this game if Zeldara 109 hadn't suggested I try it for my first real exposure to the Zelda series. It is still the only Let's Play that I've ever had to cancel due to frustration, so make of that what you will. Mega Man 4 would have been a 1. New Super Mario Bros. Would have been a 3, likely hinging on how well I could emulate DS games. I don't think the game itself differs notably in difficulty or quality from the classic 2D Marios. The Magical Quest 2 probably would have been a 4, though I might have changed it to a 3 after playing the first one. Oddly enough, the first of them is probably the best, but it's hard to say. Mega Man X3 would have been a 1. Goof Troop would have been a 6. I doubt that I would have played it alone, so I think the main barrier would have been finding someone else to play it with. Some things never change. Donkey Kong Country 3 Advance, can I call it that, would have been a 6. I could imagine feeling like the extra world wasn't enough of a reason to play it when I already did the Super Nintendo version. Copy Kitty would have been a 5, and it still is. Notably, it was the first indie game I ever played on here, and probably one of the first indie games I ever played at all. About the only one that I might have played before it is Gianna Sisters Twisted Dreams. I think I would have put it in the seems fun but should definitely familiarize myself more with it before doing a Let's Play of it category. Super Mario Bros. 3 would have been a 1. While it's definitely harder than Super Mario World, it's another classic that I doubt I'd skip. Mega Man 5 would have been a 2. I wasn't as familiar with it as I was Mega Man 7 or 8, and it might have been a little harder too. Return to Crows would have been a 5. I do have some childhood nostalgia for it, but it's a very different style of game from anything else I'd played previously, and not really the friendliest thing out there. Bugs Bunny Rabbit Rampage would have been a 5. Basically copy-paste what I said about Toy Story. Dynomite would have been a 4. I don't know how good it actually was or would have been as Let's Play material, but it is another game that I have a lot of fond memories of. One of the few PC games that falls into that category, actually. Along with Cubis, Roller Coaster Tycoon, and Return to Crows. At the very least, I feel like I would have shown it off in passing, maybe over an announcement video or something. My biggest regret with this game now is that the modern versions don't include the level editor. Why did they take it out? I made over 700 levels in that thing during my early pubescent days, as well as over 500 in Cubis, and it seems to have just disappeared off the face of the earth. How much do I have to pay PopCap or a third-party developer to add it back in? Probably quite a lot, actually, considering that PopCap is currently owned by EA, which explains why they suck now. Anyway, Donkey Kong Country Returns would have been a 4 as well. It's a wonderful game. I pretty much fell in love with it the minute I started playing it, but when I was starting out, anything requiring a capture card would have the same issues as things requiring 3DS recording do now. Okay, technically the game didn't exist yet when I started, but whatever. I wouldn't have had a good enough computer for Wii emulation either, and that's assuming that Wii emulation was even in any sort of usable condition back then. Mega Man 2 on difficult mode would have been a 4, even though it's really more like normal mode. In what other Mega Man game do bosses take 4 damage from uncharged buster shots? In addition to the game being harder, I had already played the other difficulty of Mega Man 2, so I may well have considered it redundant. Mario & Luigi Kola Kingdom Quest would have been a 4. Basically, copy-paste what I said about Starlight Island Adventure. Mega Man X would have been a 1, unsurprisingly. Plants vs. Zombies would have been a 5. I can't entirely explain my reasoning, but it strikes me as another one of those games that's better to play on one's own. The Magical Quest 3 would have been a 5, I think, since each one seemed a little less likely than the previous one, and this wasn't even officially released in English, at least not on the Super Nintendo. Crash Bandicoot 3 would have been a 3. It's the same deal as Crash 2, except that I don't like the game quite as much. Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze I already rated, but I think that if it had been out when I started, it would have gotten a 4 for the same basic reason as its immediate predecessor. Finally, Mega Man Rock'n'Roll would have gotten a 6, since it's another Mega Man fan game that would have been lumped in with the other 3. Though having played all 4 of the ones I mentioned, Mega Man Rock'n'Roll, Super Fighting Robot, Rock Force, and Unlimited, this is by far the best of the 4. Had I decided to play it first on my own time instead of recording it blind, I think my rating would have been lower. Well, after that study in the conditional perfect, I do have just a few other addenda to mention, miscellaneous comments that aren't directly related to any ratings, basically. First off, there's the matter of Super Mario Galaxy, and specifically the fact that Super Mario 3D All-Stars exists. Now, your mileage may vary on how worthwhile that collection is. Personally, I think it's exceedingly lazy compared to its namesake. Super Mario All-Stars had completely new graphics, a huge upgrade to the sound, and a game that had previously never been available outside of Japan. Super Mario 3D All-Stars seems to be just straight-up ports. As far as I can tell, it doesn't improve the graphics or sound any, it doesn't add any quality of life features, and it only includes 3 games, which is really silly given that there is a very obvious 4th game that it could have had. There was some excuse for why they couldn't include Super Mario Galaxy 2, but I forget what or how valid it was. Heck, from what I've heard, it doesn't even change the button prompts, so have fun pushing the C buttons on your Switch controller. If the original Super Mario All-Stars had had the same effort put into it, or lack thereof, it would have been the first game to do the janky A-B thing, and the only Super Nintendo game to use emulation mode, and it would have used only one of the 3 or 4 background layers. But I digress. One thing that is actually a reason to get these over the originals is the controls. You wouldn't think that it would make that big of a difference, but I played the Switch port of Super Mario Galaxy at my nephew's house, and yes, having an actually good controller instead of the nunsuck controller did have an effect on the amount of fun I had with the game. While I'm not changing the rating, if I ever did want to play that game, it would probably be the Switch version. Now let's talk about RPGs. While I'm not actually changing any of the ratings beyond the ones that already got changed, I think they've ended up being a lot less likely than I'd initially thought. I've only played 2 of them on here, and while Super Mario RPG was reasonable, Trails in the Sky was the longest LP I've ever done by a country mile, both in terms of game length and time spent on it, and it got barely any attention. And it's one of the shorter games in its series, and shorter than many others, such as Radiant Historia and Octopath Traveler. They may be my second favorite genre to play on my own time, but they don't seem to make very good Let's Plays. Maybe they'd be better for streaming? I don't know, though. I also got the Spyro Reignited trilogy relatively recently and played through that version of the first game. The games are certainly much prettier than the PS1 versions, and they seem to have added at least some quality of life features, such as a mini-map. Still though, replaying that didn't do much to endear me to the collectathon genre. If I have to use a guide for a game, it probably wouldn't be worth a Let's Play. Speaking of remake collections, the Mega Man Zero and ZX Legacy Collection exists. I have it on Steam, but I haven't actually tried it yet. There are supposedly some added features that might make them a lot more playable, especially Zero 1. I think someone said that they actually have save states. Like I said, I haven't tried that version of those games yet, but if they really do have QOL improvements over the Game Boy Advance ones, I might actually consider playing them. I also wanted to bring up streaming again. In particular, there are games I'd stream that I might not Let's Play, within limits. Don't expect any streams of Senran Kagura or Silent Hill, but it might be worth streaming some RPGs, multiplayer games, or arcade-style games / endless modes. Roller Coaster Tycoon would also be a decent one. Maybe after I've done what I want to with my regular Let's Play of that. I could also stream games that I did regular Let's Plays of a long time ago, as well as remakes and different modes of games that I've done. I've also considered a stream or a few streams where I just go through each ROM I have in succession until I game over, then move on to the next one. I've actually been streaming Bowser's Kaizo Conspiracy lately, but my schedule has been very sporadic, mainly because most of my very small audience doesn't seem to have their free time overlap much. But I'm always looking for more people to watch, and I'm the Martian Geek on Twitch too, so feel free to follow me. With that, I think that is really most sincerely all that I have to say about the Bayonetta scale. Any additional ratings will have to be in a separate video, probably as an aside comment. It was a silly idea from the start, it took forever to put together, and I already have plans for revising it, which I'll discuss at a later date, but it was interesting to think about. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next project.